Good day, everybody. We are the Chapter 9 reporters entitled Language Acquisition. Before we tackle the lessons under this topic, we have here Dan Slobin, the Human Language Series 2 in 1994, and Noam Chomsky, also the Human Language Series Program 2 in 1984. According to Dan Slobin, the Human Languages Series Program 2 in 1994, this comparison underscores the idea that language is not merely a cultural artifact but a biological endowment. Just as our ability to walk is not a skill that must be expressed, taught, but rather a natural progression of physical development, language acquisition follow a similar trajectory. Also, children across diverse environments, whether in urban slums, remote villages, or affluent suburbs, exhibit remarkable similarities in their language development. So aside from Dan Slobin, the Human Language Series Program 2, we have also Noam Chomsky. So the statement that we cannot prevent a child from learning language further emphasizes the idea that language acquisition is an automatic process. Children are not passive recipients of language. They actively engage with their linguistic environment, absorbing and processing the sounds, structure, and meanings they encounter. This innate drive to communicate and understand is a testament to the biological basis of language learning. It also invites curiosity about the mechanism at play in the brain that facilitate this process. So in essence, language is not simply a collection of memorized sentences or vocabulary. It is a complex system governed by grammatical rules. So children, through exposure to their native language, develop an understanding of these rules instinctively. So moving on, we have the linguistic capacity of children. So the process of language acquisition is not merely about memorizing words and sentences. It also involves the internalization of complex grammatical structures. So children instinctively grasp these rules, often without explicit instruction, suggesting that their brains are wired to recognize patterns and make connections. This ability to learn language so effortlessly and informally across diverse backgrounds hints at the existence of a cognitive framework that facilitates this process. The implications of universal grammar or the UG extend beyond linguistics. They touch on philosophy, psychology, and even artificial intelligence. So if language is hardwired into our brains, what does that mean for our understanding of communication and thought? How does this innate ability influence our interactions with others and our perception of the world?
So hello everyone, we are now discussing about the linguistic capacity of children. So children do not learn a language simply by memorizing sentences. Rather, they can acquire a system or grammatical rules of the sort we have to discuss in previous chapters. So children learn a language not by memorizing sentences, but by acquiring also a system of grammatical rules as previously discussed. Also, children exposed to different languages under different cultural and social circumstances all develop their native language. And children exposed to a various language under diverse cultural and social condition develop their native language. And many linguists to believe that children are equipped with an innate template or blueprint for language which we have referred to as UG or universal grammar, and that these blueprints aids the child in the task of constructing a grammar for her language. In this linguist believes children possess an innate universal grammar blueprint, aiding them in creating their own language grammar. what's learned and what's not. So innate needs hypothesis receive its strongest support from the observation that the grammar people ultimately end up with many abstract rules and structures that are not directly represented in the linguistic input they receive. So the finding that people eventually acquire a large number or abstract rules and structures that are not immediately represented in the verbal input they get provides the best evidence in favor of the innateness hypothesis. Also, it's said to be impoverished, and UG is called to be poverty of the stimulus, and structure dependency refers to the fact that grammatical rules are dependent on hierarchical structure and not on serial order. For an example, the boy is sleeping. Is the boy sleeping? This is clearly shown by introducing a more complex sentence containing a relative clause. We see that moving the main auxiliary as in produces a grammatical output, while moving the first auxiliary as in leads to ungrammatically. The boy who is sleeping was dreaming. Was the boy who is sleeping blank dreaming? Is the boy who sleeping was dreaming? So the studies show young children infer a structure-dependent rule of sentence. So the finding that people eventually acquire a large number of abstract rules and structures that are not immediately represented in the verbal input they get provides the best evidence in favor of the innateness hypothesis. One of the central goals of linguistic theory is to solve the logical problem of language acquisition. The children can quickly acquire complex grammar without assistance due to inherent principles of UG, such as structure, dependency, and X-bar theory. UG constrains grammatical rules, avoiding errors, and promoting uniform development stages, allowing children to develop without additional help. The fundamental UG concept of structure, dependency, and X-bar theory allow children to pick up complex grammar rapidly and independently. UG limits grammatical norms, preventing mistakes and encouraging consistent developmental stages, enabling kids to grow without further assistance. And the innateness hypothesis suggests all language will conform to universal grammar or UG principle. So according to the innateness theory, all language will follow the rules of universal grammar. These theories can be tested through language research, and although the structure of UG is still unclear, it is evident that human language follow these guidelines.
The next one, we have the stages in language acquisitions. So the journey from a child's first words to adult level language competence is a fascinating progression marked by the distinct linguistic stages. This developmental process highlights the remarkable capabilities of children as they navigate the complexities of language. So the researchers have dedicated significant efforts to studying these stages, utilizing various methods, including tape recordings and videotapes of children's spontaneous speech. To study the linguistic abilities of infants who are not yet verbal, researchers have devised innovative experimental techniques. So these methods allow scientists to assess language comprehension and processing skills even before children begin to speak. This early engagement With language underscores the idea that children are not merely passive recipients but active participants in their linguistic development. As children progress through various stages of language acquisition, the words and sentences they produce reflect the grammatical rules they have internalized up to the point. So each state is characterized by a growing complexity in their language use, showcasing their evolving understanding of syntax, morphology, and semantics. While the grammars of children and adults may differ in sophistication, they share fundamental formal properties. The similarity suggests that children are not creating entirely new grammatical systems, but rather building upon a shared linguistic foundation that exists across all human languages. And importantly, the children are biologically equipped to acquire all aspects of grammar. This innate capacity indicates that the ability to learn language is hardwired into the human brain, allowing children to grasp interpret grammatical structures without explicit instruction. So this biological endowment raises intriguing questions about the nature of language itself and the cognitive processes involved in its acquisition. Moving on, we have the perception and production of speech sounds. So the fascinating world of infant perception reveals that even at a very young age, babies are equipped with remarkable abilities to interact with their environment. And that's true. Research indicates that infants are not only sensitive to visual cues, such as depth and distance, but also show a preference for human faces over other visual stimuli. This suggests an innate inclination towards social interaction and bonding. Moreover, experiments have demonstrated that infants exhibit a notable response to changes in their environment, as evidenced by their increased sucking rate when presented with varied stimuli. This behavior highlights their curiosity and ability to engage with new experiences, while decrease in sucking rate upon repeated exposure indicates their capacity for habituation. In addition to visual perception, infants also display impressive auditory discrimination skills. Through preferential listening techniques, older infants have shown a tendency to turn their heads towards familiar sounds and words, indicating their developing recognition of language patterns. So, this ability to differentiate between familiar and novel auditory stimuli suggests that infants are not passive recipients of information. Rather, they actively engage with and learn from their surroundings. The interplay of visual and auditory perception in infants raises intriguing questions about the cognitive process underlying their early development and how these skills lay the foundation for future learning and social interaction. The remarkable auditory abilities of newborns highlight their innate capacity for language acquisition. Research shows that infants can distinguish phonetic contrasts found in human languages, even when these contrasts are not phonemic in their home language. For instance, Japanese infants can differentiate between the sounds R and I, a distinction that their parents struggle with. So this suggests that the infants are born with a universal ability to preserve a wide range of sounds, which allows them to learn any language they encounter during their early development. During the first year of life, infants engage in a crucial process of uncovering the sounds of the language spoken around them. So their natural aptitude for recognizing phonetic nuances enables them to absorb the linguistic patterns and sounds of their environment. So this fundamental skill not only supports the language development but also emphasizes the significance of early exposure to diverse linguistic inputs, setting the stage for effective communication later in life. So aside from the perception and production of speech sounds, we have here the babbling. So The linguistic environment plays a crucial role in shaping a child's speech perception and production from an early age. Around 6 months, infants begins to babble, and by end of the first year, their babbling reflects the sounds and intonation patterns of the language they are exposed to. For instance, by 9 months, their babbles primarily consist of repeated consonant-vowel sequence that align with their target language. This phenomenon is not limited to spoken language. Deaf children exposed to sign language also engage in a form of babbling using their hands. Throughout the first year of life, infants fine-tune their linguistic perception and productions based on the languages around them, highlighting their remarkable adaptability and readiness to communicate. So aside from babbling, we also have a first word of the children's. The holoplastic stage of language development in children is a captivating phenomenon that highlights the intercreate relationship between thought and communication. So during this age, which typically occurs around the age of 1, children begin to use single words to convey entire ideas or requests, demonstrating that their understanding of language is far more sophisticated than their verbal expression might suggest. For example, when a child says ma, they are not merely uttering a sound but are communicating a complex idea, often a request for their mother or a reference to her presence. Like when JP says down, he may be making a request to be put down, and that's as simple as that. So this understanding implies that language acquisition is not just about mimicking sounds but involves a deeper mental representation of meaning and context. So the discussion around baby sign introduces another layer of complexity. Advocates claim that teaching sign language to infants can reduce frustration before they can articulate their thoughts verbally.
Good morning, everyone. I am the next reporter, Cyril May Mato, and today I will be discussing the segmenting the speech stream. Speech is a continuous stream broken only by breath pauses. The intonation breaks that do exist do not always correspond to word, phrase, or sentence boundaries. It means it describes the challenge of learning language. Speech flows continuously with only breath marking clear breaks. Adults, knowing the language, can easily divide speech into words and sentences. However, babies don't know the language yet, so figuring out where one word ends and the next begins is a remarkable achievement. It's like listening to a foreign language. You can't understand it because you don't know the words. Baby successfully solving this puzzle is a key part of learning to speak. Next is, studies show that infants are remarkably good at extracting information from continuous speech. It means babies are surprisingly good at understanding spoken language even though it's a continuous flow of sound. They instinctively look for clues to help them identify individual words. For example, English-speaking babies pay attention to which parts of words are stressed, like said more loudly, to help them figure out where one word ends and another begins. Next is, as noted in Chapter 5, every content word in English has a stressed syllable like function words such as a, can, etc. are ordinarily unstressed. It means, in English, important words like nouns and verbs always have a stressed syllable. Short words have one stressed syllable. Longer words can have stress on the first or second syllable. Most English words stress the first syllable. Adults understand this pattern, making it easier for them to identify words in spoken language. They essentially use the stressed syllable as a signal of a new word's beginning. Okay, there is a question. Can children avail themselves of the same strategy? Do babies use the same word finding strategy as adults? Yes, babies notice stress in words very early on, even recognizing the rhythm of their native language within months. By 9 months, English learning babies prefer words with stress on the first syllable. Importantly, studies show babies use stress clues to figure out where words begin and end in normal conversation. Next, in a series of experiments, 7.5-month-old infants listened to passages with repeated instances of trochaic word such as puppy, with passages with iambic words such as guitar. It means researchers tested how 7-month-old babies identify words. They played the babies' passages with words stressed on the first syllable, like puppy, and passages with words stressed on the second syllable, like guitar. Afterward, they played words from the passages and new words. The babies listened longer to words they'd heard before, only if those words had the first syllable stress. With second syllable stress words, they only paid attention to the stress part. This shows babies, like adults, use stress syllables to find word boundaries. While this method isn't perfect, it helps them begin learning words. This is called prosodic bootstrapping, using the rhythm of language to start learning words. Next, infants are also sensitive to phototactic constraints and to the distribution of allophones in the target language. It means babies also pay attention to the sounds of their language and how those sounds are put together. For example, in English, sounds at the beginning of stressed syllables are often pronounced differently than the same sound elsewhere in a word. Babies also notice that certain sound combinations only appear at the end of words. They use these sound patterns to help them figure out where words begin and end, even at just 9 months old. Next, languages differ in their stress patterns as well as in their allophonic variation and phonotactics. It means different languages have different rhythms and sound patterns. So, a baby first needs to learn the sound patterns of their language before they can use those patterns to identify words. This seems impossible, like how can they know the language to learn the language? Babies solve this by also noticing how often certain sounds and sound combinations appear together. This statistical approach helps them start learning words even before they fully understand the language. Next, in one study, 8-month-old infants listened to 2 minutes of speech formed from 4 nonsense words like pabiko, tutibo, gulabo, and babupo. It means researchers played 8-month-old babies a 2 minutes recording of made-up words strung together without pauses. The words were pabiko, tutibo, gulabo, and babupo, and they were repeated in different orders, like different sentences, to see if the babies could figure out the word boundaries. Next, after listening to the strings, the infants were tested to see whether they could distinguish words of the language like pabiko, which recall they had never heard in isolation before. from sequences of syllables that span word boundaries, such as boo-ba-boo, which the authors refer to as part word. It means after hearing the made-up words, the babies were tested to see if they could tell the difference between whole words like pabiku and parts of words that cross word boundaries like boo-ba-boo, even though the babies had only heard the words strung together and without pauses. They could tell the difference. The researchers think the babies did this by noticing which sound combinations appeared most often. The sounds within a word always stayed the same, no matter the sentence order, but sounds across words boundaries change, making them less frequent. Next, though it is still unclear how far such statistical procedures can get the child in segmenting real language input, which is vastly larger and more varied. This experiment and others like it show that babies can use statistical information as well as linguistic structure to extract words from the input. It means, while it's not entirely clear how much this statistical method helps babies learn real world language, which is much more complex, studies show babies use both statistics and language structure to learn words. Babies might first use statistics like how often sounds appear together to learn some words, then use those words to learn the rhythm and sound patterns of the language, helping them learn even more words. Younger babies like 7 months rely on statistics, while older babies like 9 months use word stress more.
Good day, everyone. So my name is Janice. I am the one reporting the accusation of phonology. So first, when children learn to talk, they go through a process called phonological development, which is how they figure out and use the sounds of their language. This starts during the one word stage when they say simple word like mama or dada. These words are often short and easy to say, using sound like B, M, D, and K, which are common in most language. As the children grow, their pronunciation improves, but at first they simplify words to make them easier to say. And here are the 3 common ways they do this. First is the substitution. Word itself is that children replace harder sounds with easier ones. So example, instead of saying mouth with the O sound, they might say mouse using the S sound. And also there's one example, instead of ring, they might say wing because W is sound is easier than R. So the second common ways they do is the simplification. Children simplify words by removing or changing parts that are harder to say. So example, spoon. Spoon might become poon because combining S and P is tricky for them. So let's proceed to the next one, which is the last. The rule govern pronunciation. Even when children mispronounce words, they follow patterns that make sense. For example, in some languages, like German, final consonants are soft. Children do the same naturally, like turning dog into duck. So the key points of my report, which is the accusation of phonology. So children may seem like they are saying words wrong, but they actually understand them incorrectly in their heads. So for example, if a child calls both mouse and mouth, which is my example a while ago, they still know the differences. They just haven't learned to control their speech muscles fully yet. So that's all for accusation of analogy. Do you have any question or clarification? If none, so let's proceed to the next topic, which is the accusation of words meaning. So the word itself, I think we are all familiar about the word meaning. So the accusation of word meaning is when children learn a new words, they don't just copy what adults say. Instead, they figure out the meaning of words by using their own thinking and observing the world around them. So this can be tricky, but they have to decide exactly what the word refers to, like whether cat means the animal, its tail, or whether it's sitting. So, how children learn the word meaning? Do you have any idea? So if none, okay. How children learn word meanings? So children use certain principles or rules to help them learn words more easily. The first one is the overextension, using one word for many things. Children often use a single word for a whole group of similar things. Example, a child might call all four-legged animal like doggy, even if it's a cow or a goat. Or they might call all round things ball like orange or balloons. So let's proceed to the second, which is the whole object principle. So when a child learns a new word, they assume it refers to the entire object, not just a part of it. So I'll give you an example. If you point a toy car and say Zov, the child will think Zov means the car, not just it's a wheel or a door. The third one is the name one thing principle. So the name one thing principle is a children believe that each object can only have one name at first. Example, if they know the word boat, they won't think Zov also refer to the boat unless told it's a part like the sail. So from first one, so form over color principle is a children group object based on their shape, not their color. So example, a child might call all around things ball like my example, a child might call it all around things ball, which is the ball, even they are red, blue, or yellow. But they won't group all red items and call them red. Instead, they call it a ball. So the fifth one is the syntactic bootstrapping, using sentence to guess word meanings. So this is the more challenging. So when the children use how a word is used in a sentence to guess its meaning. Definition already give us an idea. So example, if they hear John bleep Mary the gloon, they might guess that bleep means giving or offering something. But the real meaning of bleep is this could imply sudden or quick action, as bleep often refers to a short sound or a pre-appearance. And also the gloon is the nonsense word with no defined meaning. So this sentence doesn't have a clear meaning because the word bleep and gloon are not commonly used in standard English. So it is really belong to the syntactic bootstrapping. Again, if someone says she fludged the ball, the child can guess that fludge means something like throwing or kicking based on the context of the sentence. But the real meaning of fludge is it is a verb that means to burn with an unsteady flame, to shine with a sudden light, or to become suddenly excited or anger. I hope I give you a clarification about syntactic bootstrapping. So the overall summary of my lesson, children are just like little detective when they are learning words. They don't just memorize, they figure out things. For example, if they see a dog, they might call it a four-legged animal like doggy, because they're still learning the differences. They also assume the new word means the whole object, like thinking Zav means a car, not just its wheel. These strategies help them to learn a new word quickly, which is why kids can learn about 14 words a day. That is all about my report. I hope you learned something. So if you don't have question, thank you.
Hello once again, my name is Rachel Biago. And now let's proceed to our next topic, which is all about the acquisition of morphology. Children's acquisition of morphology provides some of the clearest evidence of rule learning. So we have probably all heard children say bring, goad, drawed, and rond, or foots, mouses, and sheeps. These mistakes tell us much about how children learn language, because such forms could not arise through imitation. So they tell us that children are acquiring rules and that they apply these rules broadly before learning that there are exceptions such as mice, run, and so on. So some studies of the acquisition of morphology are based on children's spontaneous use of language. Other studies rely on the experiments that elicit particular forms from children. A classic experimental study of English-speaking children was based on the WAG test. This is an example of a WAG test. So children were shown a drawing of a nonsense animal like the funny creature shown in this picture. So each animal was given a nonsense name. So the experimenter would then say to the children, pointing to the picture in the left side, "This is a WAG." Then, the experimenter would show the child a picture of two of the animals. And now, there is another one. There are two of them. There are two blank. So the child's task was to give the plural form, WAGs. Another little make-believe animals was called a beak. And when the child was shown two beaks, he or she again was to say the plural form beaks. The children applied regular plural formation to words they have never heard, showing that they had acquired the plural rule. Their ability to add Z when the animal's name ended with a voice sound and S when there was a final voiceless consonant show that the children were also using allomorphy rules based on an understanding of natural classes of phonological segments and not simply imitating words that they had previously heard. Children acquiring languages with richer inflectional morphology than English reveal that they learn agreement rules at a very early age. For example, Italian verbs must be inflected for number and person to agree with the subject. This is similar to the English agreement rule, add s to the verb. For third person, singular subjects. He giggles a lot, but we giggle a lot. Except that in Italian, more verb forms must be acquired. Italian-speaking children between the ages 1 year and 10 months and 2 years and 4 months correctly inflect the verb, as the following utterances of Italian children show. Tu leggi il libro, meaning, you, in second person singular, read the book. Lo vado fuori, I go, first person singular, outside. Dorme meow dorme, sleeps, in third person singular, cat sleeps. Leggiamo il libro, we read, first person plural, the book. So similar results have been shown for children acquiring Other richly inflected languages, such as Spanish, German, Catalan, and Swahili. It is rare for them to make agreement errors, just as it is rare for an English speaking child to say I goes. So many languages, including the one just noted, also have gender and number agreement between the head noun and the article and adjectives inside the noun phrase. Children as young as 2 years old respect these agreement requirements when producing noun phrase, as shown by the following Italian examples. È mia gonna. It is my feminine singular skirt. Questo mio bimbo. This my masculine singular baby. Guarda la mela piccolina. Look at the little feminine singular apple. Guarda il topo piccolino. Look at the little mouse. So this is in masculine singular. Experimental studies with 2-year-old French-speaking children show that they use gender information on determiners to help identify the subsequent noun, le balloon, the masculine balloon, versus la banana, the feminine banana. So le is for masculine and la is for feminine. So children also show a knowledge of the derivational rules of their language and use these rules to create novel words as illustrated in English, where we can derive verbs from nouns. From the noun Google, we now have a verb Google. From the noun friend, Facebook users derive the verb to friend. So children acquire the noun to verb rule early, and it is used often because there are lots of gaps in their verb vocabulary. So for example, child utterance and the adult translation. You don't have to scale it first, which means you don't have to weigh it first. Don't broom my mess. This means don't sweep my mess. Mommy nippled Anna. The adult translation for this one is Mommy breastfed Anna. Lastly, will you chocolate my milk? This means, will you put chocolate in my milk? So children also overgeneralize some derivational morphemes, such as the er suffix used to mark agents and instrument, like cooker. The correct term here is cook. Breakers, which means car brakes. Storyer, which is storyteller. And mistaker, which actually means mistake maker. And they create their own compounds, like crowbirds. Crow, which means crow. Fire truckman, which is firefighter. Mower blower, which is the gardener. And sky car, which is the airplane. So these novel forms provide further evidence that language acquisition is a creative process and that children's utterances reflect their internal grammars, which include both derivational and inflectional rules. Now let's proceed to our next topic, which is the acquisition of syntax. When a child is still in the holophrastic stage, adults listening to the one-word utterances often feel that the child is trying to convey a more complex message. Experimental techniques show that at that stage, and even earlier, children have knowledge of some syntactic rules. So children as young as 17 months can understand the difference between sentences such as Ernie is tickling Bert and Bert is tickling Ernie, because these sentences have all the same words. The child cannot be relying on the words alone to understand the meanings. He must also understand the one-word rules and how they determine the grammatical relations of subjects and object. This same preferential looking technique has shown that 18 months old can distinguish between subject and object in WH question, such as what did the apple hit and what hit the apple. These results, and many others, strongly suggest that children's syntactic competence is ahead of their productive abilities, as we have also seen in children's lexical acquisition and the development of other components of grammar. Around the time of their second birthday, children begin to put words together into utterances, such as the following: cat stand up table, mommy sock, what that, ride truck, he play little tune, milk in there, want that, doggy big, Kathy build house, bib off, no sit there, ride truck, show mommy that, bye bye boat. These early utterances express a variety of semantic and syntactic relations. For example, noun plus noun sentences such as mommy sock can be a subject plus object relation when the mother is putting the sock on the child, or a possessive relation when the child is pointing to mommy's sock. When children first produce multi-word utterances, they are inconsistent in their use of function words or grammatical morphemes, such as a and the. Subject pronouns like I and we, auxiliary verbs such as can and is, and in some languages, verbal inflection. Many, though not all, of their utterances consist of open class or content words. During this stage, children often sound as if they are sending a text message or reading an old-fashioned telegram, which contains only the required words for basic understanding. For this reason, such utterances are sometimes called telegraphic speech, and we call this period of development the telegraphic stage. Unlike the adult sending a text, however, the child does not deliberately leave out function words. Telegraphic sentences reflect her linguistic capacity at that particular stage of language development. It can take many months before a child uses all the grammatical morphemes consistently. So when the children add another word to the two-word speech, it becomes telegraphic speech. And in telegraphic speech, children omit the functional morphemes such as articles, auxiliary, and verb inflection. So example, Nick go school, Mama read book, Rose want that. The telegraphic speech is following a subject-verb-object of English sentences. And if the syntactic tree of telegraphic sentence, it is totally similar to the adult utterances. So at this stage, the child has developed the rudimentary syntax. Although children's sentences during the telegraphic stage may lack certain function morphemes, they nevertheless obey syntactic rules similar to those in the adult grammar. Children almost never violate the word order rules of their language. In languages with relatively fixed word order, such as English and Japanese, children use the required order, SVO in English and SOV in Japanese, from the earliest stage. In languages with freer word order, such as Turkish and Russian, where grammatical relations are indicated by case markers, children quickly learn this morphology, marking subjects with nominative case and objects with accusative case with few errors. So the correct use of word order, case marking, and agreement rules shows that even though children may often omit function morphemes, they are aware of constituent structures, which, as in adult grammar, may be represented with these simplified non-X bar phrase structure trees. In order to apply the morphological and syntactic rules, she must know what syntactic categories the words in his language belong to. But how exactly does the child come to know that want and dance are verbs and that song and house are nouns? One suggestion is that children first rely on the meaning of a word to figure out its category. This is called the semantic bootstrapping. The child must have rules such as if a word refers to physical object, it's a noun, or if a word refers to an action, it's a verb, and so on. However, the rules that link certain meanings to specific categories are not foolproof. The word action denotes an action, but it is not a verb. No is not an action, but is a verb. And justice is a noun, though it is not a physical object. But the rules that drive semantic bootstrapping might be helpful for the kind of words children learn early on, which tend to refer to objects and actions. So word frames may also help the child determine when words belong to the same category. Verbs such as see, do, did, win, fix, turn, and get occur in the first frame, while adjectives like red, big, wrong, and light occur in the second. The most frequent frames typically consist of function words, determiners such as the and a, the pronouns like it and one. Time between the ages of 2 years and 6 months and 3 years and 6 months, a virtual language explosion occurs. At this point, it is difficult to identify distinct stages because the child is undergoing so much development so rapidly. By the age of 3 years old, most children are consistent in their use of function morphemes. Moreover, they have begun to produce and understand a variety of complex structures. Following is a sample of Michael's utterances between the ages of 2 years and 1 month, and 3 years and 2 months, which illustrate the speed with which children's language development progress during this period. So we can see how he utters. And then, in less than a year, Michael has gone from telegraphic utterances to fully formed, grammatical adult-like sentences. His use of coordinated sentences, relative clauses, and other kinds of embedded clauses illustrate his knowledge of recursive rules and his potential to produce an infinite range of sentences. By the age of 4, Michael, like all children everywhere, will have acquired much of the complexity of the adult grammar. So that would be all for my part. Next reporter, please.
We are now the topic of the acquisition of pragmatics. So, what is the acquisition of pragmatics? So, the process by which people, especially the young ones, learn to comprehend and utilize the language in context is known as pragmatic acquisition. The study of pragmatic subfield of linguistics examines how social norms, motivations, and conversational conventions all influence meaning. Learning how to use language effectively in a variety of social situations is a necessary part of developing pragmatic competence. So let's get moving on. The children must learn the appropriate use of language in context or pragmatics. So the question of pragmatics. Children must learn the appropriate use of language in context or pragmatics. So the context of a speech even includes the speaker and the listener. It is difficult for younger children about 2 years old to understand the shifting reference of these pronouns because of the meaning of I and you varies depending on who is speaking and who is listening. A typical error that children make at this age is to refer to themselves as you, like I said, saying for an example, you want to take a walk when they mean I want to take a walk. So, the acquisition of pragmatics is the study of how the children learn to bridge the gap between the semantic meaning of words and structures and the intended meaning of an utterance.
Setting parameters. Nowhere is the interplay of universal and language-specific properties within acquisition better illustrated than in children's setting of UG parameters. It means that the best example of how both universal like common to all languages and specific like unique to each language features work together in language learning is how children learn the rules of their language. Next, children acquire some aspects of syntax very early, even while they are still in the telegraphic stage. It means, even when children speak in short, simple sentences, they already understand some basic grammar rules. One important rule is word order. Some languages put the verb before the object, like in English, eat apple, while others put the verb after the object, like in Japanese. Children learn their language's word order very early, even before they speak much. They don't have to learn a new rule. They just need to figure out whether their language puts the important words at the beginning or end of the phrase. English speakers learn the head first rule and Japanese speakers learn the head last rule. Next, other parameters of UG involve the verb movement rules. In some languages, the verb can move out of the VP to higher positions in the phrase structure tree as illustrated in the Dutch and Italian questions just discussed. It means another grammar rule children learn early is about moving verbs in sentences. In some languages like Dutch and Italian, verbs can move around in sentences to make questions. In English, verbs don't move, like only helping verbs do. Children quickly learn whether their language allows verb movement. Children who speak Dutch or Italian learn to move verbs to make questions. English-speaking children never make the mistake of moving the main verb even before they know all the grammar rules. This shows children don't learn these rules from scratch. They just choose the right rule for their language based on what they hear. They don't need to figure out how to move the verb. They just need to know if it's allowed on their language. Last one is the parameters of UG limit the grammatical options to a small, well-defined set. Is my language head first or head last? Does my language have verb movement or not? And so on. It means the rules built into our brains limit the possible grammar rules of any language to a small number of choices. For example, does the language put the important word at the beginning or end of a phrase? Does it move verbs Does it move verbs around in sentences? These limited choices make it much easier and faster for children to learn their native language. And that's all my part. Thank you. Next reporter.
Next topic is the acquisition of signed languages. So we have language development in deaf children with signing parents. Just like hearing children naturally acquire spoken language from their environment, deaf children born to signing parents acquire sign language in a similar way. They go through the same stages like babbling or the repetitive hand movements, using single signs, and it is equivalent to single words, and combining signs to form phrases and sentences. There is a telegraphic stage where function signs may be omitted, but their use becomes consistent around the same age as function words in spoken languages. The ages at which signing children go through each stage are comparable to children acquiring spoken language. The telegraphic stage refers to when children leave out smaller grammatical elements, example, function signs like is or the, but still communicate meaningfully. And over time, their use of these grammatical elements becomes consistent, just like in spoken language development. Next is the question formation in American Sign Language. In ASL, WH questions like who, what can follow two patterns. The WH word can move to the beginning like in spoken English, who Bill see yesterday. The H word can stay in its original position like Bill saw who yesterday. Instead of using changes in words order like spoken English does with does or did, ASL relies on non-manual markers such as facial expression. Example, furrowed brows, tilted head, to show it is a question. And this is similar to how spoken English uses rising intonation to indicate a question. Children learning ASL master moving or keeping the WH phrase in place but often forget to include non-manual markers, making their questions incorrect according to adult grammar. Next is the iconicity and pronoun use in ASL. Some ASL signs directly reflect their meaning. For example, the pronoun I involves pointing to yourself, while you involves pointing to the person you are addressing. Despite this transparency, signing children still make errors around the age of 2. They may mix up I and you, similar to how hearing children learn spoken languages often confuse pronouns. And this shows that even in iconic signs, children treat pronouns as part of a linguistic system, not just as simple gestures. Next is the challenges for deaf children with hearing parents. Deaf children born to hearing parents who don't expose them to sign language from birth. They face significant challenges in acquiring any language. Since spoken language depends on hearing and auditory feedback, deaf children cannot naturally acquire it without special training. Even with this training, they rarely achieve fluency. And this highlights the importance of exposing deaf children to sign language early in life for natural language development. Next, we have the late learners of sign language. Similar to how learning spoken language later in life can be difficult, late exposure to sign language also results in lower fluency. Early language exposure is critical for achieving full competence in any language, whether spoken or signed. Lastly, we have development of home signs. When deaf children lack exposure to a formal language, they create their own system of gestures called home signs. And these gestures include individual signs, combinations, and even basic sentence structures. Though not as developed as a full language like ASL, home signs show linguistic complexity that arises from within the child. And this demonstrates the innate human ability and drive to communicate through language even without external input. The role of the linguistic environment, adult input. First, we have the drive to acquire language. Children deprived of linguistic input show a clear drive to acquire language as seen in deaf children who create home signs. A mature linguistic system requires a language environment. Even when a children lack a language-rich environment, their innate drive to acquire language emerges. And this is evident in the case of deaf children who create home signs, basic but systematic forms of communication. However, a fully developed linguistic system requires exposure to a structured language environment to progress beyond rudimentary systems. Second, function of linguistic input. Linguistic input helps children extract the underlying rules and parameter settings of their language. Parameter setting models suggest that children use linguistic data to uncover language structure. Linguistic input, it serves as the foundation for children to analyze and internalize the structure of their language. Through parameter setting models, children use input to determine language-specific rules such as word order, grammar, and pronunciation patterns. And the input acts as the data source for children's understanding of their native language. Third, role of adult input. Early behaviorist views emphasize the importance of adult input and feedback for language learning. Some general learning theories also highlight the role of adult input in language acquisition. Early theories, such as behaviorism, argued that language is learned through imitation and reinforcement from adults. More recent general learning theories suggest that adult feedback shapes language acquisition by leveraging general cognitive skills such as pattern recognition. Both approaches emphasize the critical role adults play in shaping a child's linguistic development. Fourth, current understanding. Language is a complex cognitive system that cannot be fully acquired through behaviorist or general learning principles. The modern linguists and psychologists view language as a highly complex cognitive system. While adult input and general learning mechanisms are important, they are insufficient on their own to explain the depth of language acquisition, and this highlights the unique cognitive capabilities humans have for learning language.
Good morning. I am Abigail Texon, the last reporter for today's discussion on language acquisition. My part is to discuss the role of imitation, reinforcement, and analogy, as well as the role of structured input. Without further ado, let's start. So we have here the interaction between a child and an adult. As you can see, the child uses incorrect grammar saying hold it instead of held. Despite the adult's corrections, the child continues using the incorrect form, showing how children often overgeneralize rules like adding ed to form past tense. The conversation between the child and the adult illustrates that language acquisition is not solely based on imitation. The child repeatedly uses the incorrect verb form holded, despite the adult modeling the correct term held. This interaction shows that children do not simply mimic adult speech, but instead apply their understanding of language rules, which can sometimes lead to errors. Next, a common misconception about language acquisition is that children learn language solely by listening and imitating speech that oversimplifies the process of language acquisition. While it's true that imitation plays a vital role, children do much more than just copy what they hear. Next, children use inflectional and relational processes to create novel words and form sentences that systematically differ from adult speech, reflecting their developing understanding of language rules. In the interaction provided, the child simplifies or restructures the adult sentences based on their grasp of grammar. For example, his going out becomes he go out, showing the omission of tense markers, and where can I put them becomes where I can put them, indicating word order experimentation. These differences highlight how children actively construct language patterns as they learn rather than just copying what they hear. Next, imitation also fails to account for the fact children who are unable to speak neurological or psychological reasons are able to learn the language spoken to them and understand it. Once their impairments are resolved, they can immediately use the language for speaking. Another proposal in the behaviorist tradition is that children learn grammar through positive reinforcement, with adults correcting ungrammatical sentences to encourage proper language use. In addition, adults often recast children's sentences into correct forms like turning it fall to it fell. This helps model proper grammar, aiding children's language development through example rather than direct correction. Even when adults correct children's grammar, it doesn't fully explain how children learn or develop proper language use, as they often struggle to grasp what they are doing wrong. For example, in the dialogue, when the child said, "Nobody don't like me," then the adult correct them saying, "No, say nobody likes me." Then the child repeated, "Nobody, nobody don't like me." This exchange repeats 8 times without success. Finally, the adult says, "Now, listen carefully. Say nobody likes me." Then the child responds, "Oh, nobody don't likes me," adding an additional error. This demonstrates that children don't immediately internalize corrections because they are still learning the underlying grammatical rules, highlighting the complexity of language acquisition. Next, it has also been suggested that children put words together to form phrases and sentences by analogy, by hearing sentence and using it as a model to form other sentences. However, for this to work, they must generalize rules from specific examples. The challenge with analogy is that children also need to know when the general rule doesn't apply, which complicates the process. Let's go through the last part of the lesson, the role of structured input. Another suggestion that children are able to learn language because adults speak to them in a special simplified language sometimes called motherese or child-directed speech, CDS. This hypothesis also places a lot of emphasis on the role of environment in facilitating language acquisition. In many cultures, adults use a special way of speaking to young children called motherese. This includes speaking slowly, clearly, with higher pitch and exaggerated intonation. While using grammatically correct sentences, infants tend to prefer motherese over regular adult speech. Researchers believe that exaggerated features of motherese help capture a child's attention and highlighting important aspects of language. However, motherese is not syntactically simple. It includes a range of complex sentences such as questions, like, do you want to choose now? Embedded sentences like, Mommy thinks you should sleep now. Imperatives like, pet the dog gently. And negatives tag questions like, we don't want to hurt you, do we? Moreover, adults do not simplify their language by removing verb and noun inflections or omitting function words, but children often do this as part of their language development. Next, studies show that the use of mother-words does not significantly impact the speed of a child's language development. Children whose mothers use more mother-words features do not develop language faster than those whose mother used fewer. Lastly, imitation, reinforcement, and analogy cannot fully explain language development because they focus on learning sentences or forms rather than understanding grammatical rules. Theories that emphasize structured input place too much emphasis on the environment rather than on the grammar-making abilities of the child. That concludes our lesson for language acquisition. Thank you for listening.